Hey, thank you all again for joining us for America's Jobs Team podcast. I'm really lucky today. We have Chris Camacho joining us. And Chris is not only a great friend, I sit on the board of the International Economic Development Council with Chris, but somebody who I admire their organization and I think know it fairly well. It's easy to admire groups that you don't know, but when you get to meet such amazing leaders at multiple levels in the organization, you get a pretty good feeling of who the leader at the top is. And Chris has just built an incredible team. And I know Chris is a team guy, so that makes my first question really easy. So tell us about first thing, welcome, Chris, but tell us about your career, how you got into economic development and why, you really come out of a team's background.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Ron. It's great to be here. And I would say for most people in economic development, there's not a straight path. At least when I was coming out of school 20 years ago, there was no immediate alignment with economic development at the time. And so you kind of had to find your way. And so just a quick version, I went to college playing soccer, and I was a big sports guy. And so you mentioned being part of a team. I think a lot of the analogies I use today are sports analogies with our team and referencing leadership and teamwork and putting all on the line all the time. But this kind of windy road, I actually went to school believing I was going to do pre-med and wanted to become a doctor and had that in mind. Well, that quickly changed as I got into school and saw the depth and requirement of time while I was trying to play a very high level athletic program. So I ended up moving into psychology and economics for undergrad, and then ultimately shifted into public policy and tax analysis, in grad school, and really focused on the tax side. And what was interesting is, I had a chance to go to a party, believe it or not, between undergrad and grad school. Believe it, hard to believe that parties can shape your life. But I actually went with my then girlfriend to a party, and I sat next to a woman who was in the tax analysis program, and she raved about it and talked about the work she got to do for the community. And I thought I was going to go back for my MBA and ended up going back for my MPA. And then fortunately for me, I was able to work during that graduate school program for Mike Pearsall, who works in Southern Illinois. And at the time he ran the Edwardsville Glen Carbon Alliance. And so I got a lot of real hands-on practical experience really early in my career. And I thank Mike a lot for just exposing me early on. I had a lot of questions. I was very eager. And I think he set forth a really strong understanding, along with Dr. Robert Kepke. If you remember that name from years ago.
Bob.
Yeah, Bob used to do kind of special training sessions with me. And again, an eager kid asking a lot of questions. He kind of took a liking to me, and likewise on my side. And so I do believe that helped me get my first role. And then from there, moved out west after working at St. Louis for a few years, and got to become a CEO when I was 26. And I never looked back. I worked in the southwestern part of the state in Yuma, Arizona, and had a great time working in a kind of semi-rural community. It's the third largest region in the state of Arizona. However, it was still about 200,000 people. So I got to understand working on the border, international commerce, and so forth. And then, moved to Phoenix not long after that in 2008, and have been here for the last 12 years after working under Barry Broom for 6 years, moved to the number one slot in 2014. So it's been a great ride.
It's an awesome synopsis. And one of the things that it brings a question that a lot of leaders, I think, struggle with. And you went from, you started out and it feels traditional. You're the number two in a small, medium size, and then you go to a small metro. But then to take that pivot into an organization as the number two, and I'm not even sure it was even classified as the number two when you went in. Talk about that from a career management standpoint, that discussion, because that had to be some trepidation about feeling like you were going backwards, even though we know now from the results, it definitely was a forward strategy. Talk about what that thought process was of being willing to go from being the number one, your name's the top of the stationery, to one amongst a bunch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I was in Yuma, again, we had a great team down there as well, smaller budget, but we actually put a lot of points on the board in those 4 years, and I was really prideful of the work we were doing, working in a 4-region area with California and northern Mexico, 2 Mexican states, and really just amplifying and organizing a governance model around leadership and how the economy works and binational efforts. And I'll never forget, and Barry tells the story really well. I had him down probably in 2007, I think it was, to kind of my annual event where I'd have 300 or 400 business people come out, and I would talk about the economy. I would talk about the trends, the industry activity, and I would bring down a keynote typically, and might be a university president, might be another economic developer. Well, that year I had Barry come down, and in front of my entire investor network, Barry says, this is a young guy that one day will be working with me in Phoenix. And of course I gasped because I think this is in front of everybody who pays my paycheck. But afterwards, Barry and I went to dinner, and we were just talking about leadership and expectations and impact. And what I learned, or my takeaway from him, being a hard charging kind of tenacious guy like I am, is I thrive when I'm in an environment with other people that are kind of cut that way. And so I'll never forget, the words he said to me then was, he stated, you're in the top of your game in the AAA ball, but if you want to play in the big leagues, you got to come up to a place like Phoenix. And of course, being the fierce competitor I am, I took that as a challenge, and I came up to Phoenix in 2008. Obviously, great timing to come to Phoenix during the worst recession we've ever seen. But I look at that team we had with Janet Labar, who's now in North Carolina, and Matt Miller, who's now running Portland, Rod Miller, who's in Puerto Rico. A lot of our peers, John Kruger, a lot of these individuals that were there at the time, Barry knew how to pick talent. And I think now that I've been doing this as long as I have, I think that's something I feel really strongly about as well, is you can find people who are disciplined, willing to do the hard work, but also have intelligence, both emotional and general aptitude, that enable you to do this work, because it's not easy. But being kind of meshed with these other leaders, it certainly allowed me to understand where my strengths were and some of my shortcomings were, and I worked on those shortcomings and worked to develop my way into a better leader.
So I think you made another great comment, and we have a list of questions that I haven't gotten any of them yet, but this idea that putting yourself in a position with other great teammates about making you stronger. And the one thing about all those names that you listed is those are all people who I know personally, who are all very competitive, very smart, very driven. And to build an organization that thrives off of that and everybody makes each other better, versus you see organizations all the time that split up because of the egos of the leaders can't learn to work together. You've done that same modeling. What's that leadership lesson? How do you encourage people to be great, to grow and charge hard and on a team that, frankly, the names that you listed it's an all-star team. And a lot of times all-star teams don't play very well as teams. They play well as individuals. What's the secret sauce in there?
Well, I think, you have to find people who have humility, but also recognize that other team members have capabilities that might augment your own abilities. And I think we saw that very clearly. And I think about the times Janet Labar and I spent together, where her mind around strategic planning and really working from a community advocacy perspective, engagement strategies to keep an organizational governance model healthy, while I certainly thrived on the business development side, the market strategy side, sitting across the table from executives to look at everything from tax and finance models, and then giving the real-time feedback back to the communities as to what's needed to be prepared for the next generation of industry. And so I think about all of these capable people. I use a lot of, again, sports analogies in our office today to really enhance our culture, which, every team has a captain. Every team has a handful of key performers. Every team has some key role players. And I think about how you get an organization like this to gel, because we bring type A people in regularly that are top of their game in their own area, whether it's marketing or comms or research or analytics. And, we require that the team spirit or the team oriented focus is there day one. And if you don't have that, it's almost like the core team senses that, and you won't be successful in an organization like ours. And I tell people in our first interview out of the gate, that you're going to walk in and there's a lot of really smart people here. There's a lot of people who are very competitive, fiercely competitive, and want to win, but we want to win for the community. And if you want to get on that bus with this team, know that going in. And if it's not, that doesn't fit for who you are, regardless of how smart you are or what your pedigree is from your background, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It matters that you have the chops and the capabilities, but you're willing to step in and work in lockstep, arm in arm, through the good times, which we've had a lot of, and through the challenging times, which the last 6 months have represented. And that really shows the true colors of a team when you're able to respond and meet crisis needs for your community.
I think that's awesome. The change, you talked about the last 6 months. How has the pandemic affected the way you lead? It's been tough. The first 2 months working from home were kind of fun. We saw productivity at least where it should be, in some cases up. After the first 2 months, our team was, in our case, begging to go back to the office, and we've been back in ever since. But my leadership style has had to change dramatically. Has it changed and impacted the way you lead the organization and lead individuals who all have, you have to be a leader with heart right now. You have to be the humanist leader, because, you can't say, well, you got to be at work. Well, I have 3 kids at home. I can't be there, and you got to figure this out. And for me, that was a little, it wasn't difficult. It just took a lot of energy that normally would go into other things. How's that affected you?
Well, I can say likewise, kind of March, April, part of May, where, in Phoenix, it's 82 degrees and beautiful, and you can do your calls while you're walking around your neighborhood, or, watching your kids swim or whatever that might be when they're out of school. But yeah, I think what changed for me the most is I garner energy from being around other people who will challenge me intellectually, and we can be creative together. And one of the key shifts we made immediately, and I give our COO a lot of credit, where we were talking about the cadence of how are we with regularity going to ensure that the team understands the priorities, and the team overall understands that we're in a new environment, but we can maintain productivity and monitor productivity on all of these key strategies that we deploy. And so what we did is we scheduled an every morning call with our management team. And we've still done that every day since this began. And then we also hold an all staff, all hands meeting through Zoom every morning as well, which might seem like overkill. I was the first to raise my hand and said, I think that's too much. But what I took away from that was, culturally, the team wanted to see how we were reacting and how I was reacting. And so you'd have news around social unrest and George Floyd. You'd have, news around the economy. You'd have news around bankruptcies, news around PPP. And so a lot of the daily check-ins enabled me just to be human, as you said. And most see me as someone who's on the front lines working with the top leaders in our state, and may not get a lot of FaceTime with me. But what my takeaway was, I was able to connect with each of our individual teammates in a way that I hadn't before. And so the upside, I think, is I've actually probably engaged our team more so through this process in one-offs, where I'll do a 15-minute check-in with each team member periodically, and just kind of understand what their home life looks like, what kind of stress they're feeling, how their work is going, what kind of clarity do they need from me, or what kind of vision do they have or do I have, and see where those items collide. So ultimately, I think there's been some positives, but like you said, I'm always eager to get back and be around people. I really enjoy, again, strategy together and whiteboarding, and it's a lot harder when I'm sitting in my home office like I am, today, writing on my glass windows here. It's just not the same. So we have found ways to get our team in kind of pockets back to the office and work together, but we're still, because Arizona peaked so late with COVID numbers, and thank goodness we're on the tail end of that. we had to push our start date back into late fall, and that's what we'll plan on doing.
Yeah, for us, we were already our culture of meeting every morning at 8:05. We'll meet for 15 minutes, everybody that's in the office that day. And so taking that to Zoom was a natural for us, but the length of the meetings doubled or tripled because there were so many questions about engagement and where are we at on, racial unrest, where are we at on, COVID related things. We are so just like you integrated in a lot of very specifics in the community that it became a kind of teaching. And what we found was the anxiety levels of our team dropped, and understanding that, my wife and I are empty nesters. We don't have kids at home. So my life and how I react to this is different. And you can't, if you've got 3 kids at home under the age of 6, you can't try to emulate the way I'm working now. It's not going to work. So we had to give people permission those first couple of months to be humanist about it. And now coming back in the fall, we're in Michigan, so it peaked early for us. But coming back in the fall, there's no school. So everyone with school-age kids is going to be at home trying to get their kids to learn online. That means a different work schedule during the day for people, and they're going to be working earlier and later and taking time in the middle of the day with their kids. So it's the work still has to be done. We're just going to do it in different ways, and we'll come out of it stronger. And,
yeah, I think the only other thing I would add too, Ron, is the trust aspect of being in this environment for me also has changed. And not that I didn't trust the team before, but I think as you get into this work style where it's mandatory that you rely on your management team to then oversee the remaining balance of the other departments in their department reports, it's created this unique level of autonomy, working autonomously, but also trust within the system. So I think it's been really healthy for us as we've set up, really strong KPIs and looking at how, as I learned as we put all these together, that we had 68 unique strategies deployed for the market. Like that's actively going on right now, which is hard to wrap your head around. Which may seem like a lot, but I read a lot, and I think this week it was Siemens talking about, going virtual for a long period of time, and how managers have to change their traditional measurement approaches or oversight approaches. And for me, I'm pretty rigid, and although I think I can adapt, but I'm pretty rigid in kind of the management style and expectation model. But that this has really forced me to think differently about how do we ensure that these 68 different strategies are getting done, really relying on the management team to see much more of that through than typically I would have my hands in so many more things. But just because of this system and the current crisis, you have to pick where you can play a role and have an impact. So I think that's something else that as we return, I'll probably have a different leadership model coming out of this than I did entering it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think one of the things you said there about reading a lot was it has amazed me. And like you, I get to spend most of my day, talking with really smart leaders who I appreciate, but the people who are thriving in it, the companies that are thriving, whether their financials are thriving or not, in a lot of cases, they don't have any impact over that. But it's organizationally, culturally, psychologically, are those that are using this time to learn, to figure out what the best are doing, and to figure out how to take that and rapidly bring it into their organizations, and then are willing to share back out. I serve on the board of a couple of private companies, and I have learned more in this model of rapid sharing. Here's what we're doing. And we put together weekly, we have a fairly large board. We have a very large board, actually. And so we took our top management team and assigned them into small groups. So we're having weekly small group board meetings that there'll be 8 or 10 members of that board, so 7 meetings. And it has, our attendance is off the charts because they're all sharing best practices with
Mm-hmm.
each other and learning with each other. And, we've gone from where do you buy PPE to, how's your family going to handle it, when you're not traveling all the time? And how's that impacted things? And what are you doing about tutors? And so it's created these micro groups to learn from each other that when we come out of this, will not be able to replicate how great we've grown culture.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of good things coming out of this. The what makes you proud of your region, how they've embraced change this year, and that others should learn from?
Well, I would respond by saying our success as an organization dates back to Ioana Morphesis and Rick Weddle and Barry, and we've had a long, credible 30-year run of producing. And so the last 5 years, arguably, we've been putting more people into jobs, bringing more companies to market, launching more marketing strategies, launching more policy at the legislature than ever before. But I would say what's drastically changed just in this last window of time has been our ability to adapt to the needs of the community. And the first example of that would have been the explanation around the Paycheck Protection Program, the economic injury disaster loans. I mean, the enormity of the impact to small business is so profound that a lot of our businesses that even the banked businesses had trouble working through that process, let alone the underbanked or the micro businesses. So traditionally, we would not spend significant amounts of time in the small business segment. We pivoted so dramatically, put toolkits together, stood up chat lines very quickly. So that 3-week period, I mean, we were essentially a small business crisis organization. And I'm really proud of the work that the team put together. And again, that's one example. There's about 6 of those in the last few months that we've stood up that I think has had a pretty significant impact for the community. And everything from advising the county and the cities on their CARES Act dollars and how to structure a small business program to have impact, to set the right eligibility requirements, but not be overburdened somewhere. You're leaving out a large segment of the business population. So there's a lot of those things that I'm really proud of. And I would characterize it just as sheer adaptability to meet the need of the community. And, albeit during that time, we were still seeing, because Phoenix is a growth market. So, right, we're almost 5 million people in the region and still one of the fastest growing. And the shocker for me, I'll tell you one other side bit on this, is our housing developers, some of the top in the country, Taylor Morrison, Pulte Homes, Marikay, they had record-breaking June numbers. So obviously people are still moving in this pandemic. And so all of that being said, I look at work we're doing around digital divide, and it's so much more than just finding tablets and laptops for underserved households. It's about Wi-Fi, it's about the Wi-Fi speeds, it's about capacity, it's about digital literacy. All of these aspects are things we're very deep entrenched in working on right now. And if you would have told me a year ago, Chris, you'd be deeply entrenched in these kind of areas, I would have been intrigued, because I think it's certainly the right things to do. But even more so now, education funding, tax reform, there's some big things that we're involved in that I think each of us bear that responsibility to step up and lead during crisis more so than ever before.
It's an awesome answer. The one of the things, and I'm not blowing wind up your skirt, but one of the things under your leadership at GPEC, and I've known all 3 of your predecessors, the amount of passion and gratitude that the community-based economic developers have for you and GPEC, and the great things that they're regularly telling us that you probably don't get to hear, but we do, about how incredible you all are servicing them and your data and you work with them and this kind of nurturing, lifting up feel about that. Um, Talk about that because my assumption is because you've been a small an economic developer in a small organization, a mid-sized organization, and now one of the biggest in the country, one of the biggest communities, and our listeners know that it's rare to have a community your size with one central organization that's been there forever, that doesn't get changed out every mayor. How is that? What's your philosophy around that that others should be learning from? Because I think in this world of haves and have-nots, there's a lot of ways that we as leaders should be more sensitive to lifting up those. So it's a weird way to ask a question.
No, well, first of all, the admiration from the communities, and it gave me the chills just to hear the words around our communities, appreciating the work, because we do work really hard. And I tell our team every day, we show up and we go to work for our communities, and that's something we all kind of wear as a prideful badge of honor. But I would say this too: it's no accident that the communities have continuity with us. And I'll give you a couple examples. So we have what's called a community partnership program. So it's way beyond transactions and how our system works, our transparent governance structure when a new deal comes in. That's one piece of it, but it's much more than that, which is we go out and meet with every one of the mayors on a regular basis. Many of them serve on the board, but I'm actually spending one-on-one time, and we're spending our analytics and strategy team is out with the city economic developers on a regular basis, looking at everything from industry composition to trade area depth to overexposure in sectors, commerce park preparation, infrastructure, the creative class attraction, all of these attributes that are domain to what we do. We go out as like a consulting team and help our communities analyze their own strategies. And we're not going to play big brother on this. We're just almost an ad hoc, system that enables them to ask questions or, throw something into our research and analytics team for us to dive deeper into. So we have a really strong alliance and partnership with our communities well beyond transactions, because what I've learned in all my years doing this is if your relationship is only transactional and the mayor views you as the transactional entity only, the deals come go. They come to the market, but they land where the infrastructure and the labor is located and infrastructure is located. So, we don't really control that at the regional level. So we spend time with our cities talking about where they're at in the life cycle, what do they need to do to compete, and we're very transparent and direct and create a lot of, I think, authentic relationships that way. It's not without its challenges. I've had a few mayors that got seated over my course and time here who came in my first meeting said, we don't get it and we want to take our ball and go home. And I said, well, if you want to do that, let me lay out for you what that looks like. And let me lay out for you what it looks like as being a partner with us. And, you may not get a project from GPEC that closes in your community for 10 years. And I talk about the example of Chandler, Arizona, in the southeastern part of our region where Intel's located and many other advanced electronics companies. They do probably with us maybe 5 or 6 new deals every year. They went an 11-year period with no projects from us. And so again, I know it's a long-winded answer, Ron, but I spent a lot of time up front with our mayors. And so Tempe, Arizona just seated a new mayor, Mayor Corey Woods, who's going to be an absolute stud for our community. And I spent an hour with him last week just talking through all the strategies that I think their community should be working on. He gave me insight as to what he thinks we need to do from a policy standpoint on community development tools and so forth. These are the kind of things that I think if you lead with integrity and authenticity and you're honest up front with them on where their community thrives and where they have some opportunities to get better, that's really where I feel like if I went around the horn of all of our economic developers, I speak to them regularly. I'm accessible, I'm available, I come out when they ask me to, and I have their back on things that they need. And I think that's what really builds trust and enables us to be successful regionally.
Well, as you know, because of the consulting side of what we do, we get to talk to a lot of economic developers in a lot of regions. I think I talked to, they figured it up, over 400 last year,
Wow.
economic developers that we sat with and talked. And your region and the Research Triangle team are the two regions that consistently talk about the relationships and how it is really one team. They may have to represent a small area of that team, but they talk about the value that gets added and the trust that they have and the lack of anxiety or fear about the relationship. And we hear that in a lot of regions about, well, we have to be nice to those guys because they won't bring us a deal, but they really are screwing us every day. And that just doesn't, you need to know, people need to know when people are saying nice things about them. And you should know that your surrounding communities are talking nice about you.
That's great. Well, as we talk, we're consistently thinking about how do we add value to our communities, and that's a regular conversation that we have, and how do we increase our ROI back to the community so there's a tangible, direct, measured return on investment for each community that we serve, and at the same time there's other intangible values that we can provide. So we regularly talk about that.
Well, you're doing a great job of it, and as you know, you're doing a great job, for our country. One of the questions that we always like to ask, because we get a different answer every time, which is part of the reason we ask it, is when I ask you the question, what does it mean to be an American? What's your answer to that?
Well, I think to be American, and first of all, we're extraordinarily fortunate. We live in a country that has freedoms and protections unlike any other country in the world. We're obviously in a unique period of time right now where some of the decisions that have been made for the last probably more like 60, 70 years have really set forth some of the unrest that we're experiencing today. And I believe that, as General Mattis said, this is the world's greatest experiment, 300 years plus of experiment. And here we are, as I think about the next America. It takes leaders like us to come together and address these issues head on. And one of the things I find very complex in running one of these organizations is we're all so impatient, and we just expect that we can rally a market, lead a market, execute in a market, and as a byproduct, change will happen overnight. And in a lot of these cases, whether it's racial equity or diversity or inclusion or jobs equity, these take time. And that's really hard for someone like me and others that I know in this profession. But I think the more that we're able to stay, nonpartisan and apolitical, but yet, look out for all of our citizens. And I'll give you one example of this as it relates to something I didn't think we'd be focusing on, but we are, is we've always been a region that wanted to focus on kind of catalyst jobs, high wage jobs that would create, more tradable sector opportunities and so forth. We created a program recently with our cities called the Path Opportunities. And it's really about an intentional focus of corridor development in underserved areas that the cities are going to provide resources to companies that want to co-invest in these areas and create upskilling alignment and reskilling alignment with our community college and our other service providers, all because the greater Phoenix region continues to grow, much like our other U.S. markets. But what I don't want to see in the next 30 years is massive inequity where you have the have and have nots, and that gap is widening, unfortunately. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to look at every policy with that equity lens. And it's no longer just about high wage catalyst jobs in every respective region. It needs to be about how do we ensure that there's prosperity and even education as equalizer opportunities for all of our residents. And so this whole digital divide focus that we've undertaken and many other U.S. markets have undertaken, I think symbolizes where there's some misfiring in our policy construct, and we just need to do better. And I'm hopeful that we're able to serve as a convener and uniter in that realm to advance these hard conversations. And I think that's what being American does. It allows you to look at the opportunity before you and make change happen. And that's what I hope we're all kind of taking forward as our responsibility.
That's a great answer. And Chris, thanks for being with us. You're a great friend to do this. And you're one of those leaders that I truly admire. So thanks for being with us, and please take care of yourself and your team. You're important to all of us.
Thank you so much, Ron. It's great to see you again, and likewise, hopefully get to see you soon.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Thanks, Chris.
Okay.